Today's episode is brought to you in full by Heartlift International, a 501c3 dedicated to making home and family the safest, most secure place on earth. Learn how you can donate and support the podcast at heartliftcentral.com. Now, settle in for today's remarkable conversation with Janelle. Wherever you find yourself today, may these words help you become stronger in every way.
A reading from Longing for Joy, an invitation into the goodness and beauty of life by Alastair Stern. When joy comes out to play, it is when something good is at hand. She stirs our hearts to celebrate goodness in its many, many forms. And so often, as is her way, joy shows up when we're with others or thinking of them, because she is deeply relational by nature. She takes us by the hands and dances in the space between us. Joy rises and falls like a crescendo. As her symphony ends, we sigh in appreciation. It is I'm so excited to bring to you Heartlifters Alastair Stern. He is a creative director turned pastor. He serves as the associate pastor at Coastline Church in Victoria, British Columbia. He has previously partnered with Redeemer City to City and founded St. Peter's Fireside, a creative liturgical church in Vancouver. He is the author of our book today, Longing for Joy, an invitation into the goodness and beauty of life, and his first book, Rhythms for Life, Spiritual Practices for Who God Made You to Be. I highly recommend. Hello, and welcome to today's Heartlift with Janelle, a little jingle jangle edition. Yes, it is the Christmas season, and I am embracing it with such an incredible amount of expectation this season. If you haven't already, I would love to invite you to join me and a whole little community of Heartlifters who are going to be doing some Advent glimmering. Glimmering is quite the opposite of triggering. So when we're glimmering, we are looking, we're hunting, we're seeking, we're searching for cues that ignite within us a robust feeling of joy and beauty and peace and ease and all the good feelings, right? I love me some good feelings. So in order to be a part, to participate with us, I am doing this through Heartlift Central over on Substack, and I am offering this to my paid subscribers. And to honor that, I have sliced the fee and given it quite a healthy discount. You can become a monthly subscriber or an annual subscriber with this slashing discount. Why not? We've had Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and I just thought I'd join in on the fun. Don't get to do that very often. And so when you become a paid subscriber over on Heartlift Central, you will receive these 4 beautiful bonus packages of an audio meditation, a beautiful PDF guide, and some video teachings as well. And then it'll all culminate on December 23rd from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Well, we'll gather on a Zoom gathering, have a little cup of cheer, and share our community glimmers. And we will just end it with a festivity of glimmering. I am already feeling joy in my heart just from saying glimmering so many times. So what do? You go to @Heartlift Central. That'll bring you right to my Substack, Heartlift Central, and there's where You have your very own online community of Heartlifters committed to what? Our healthy sense of self, healthy behavior patterns, and healthy communication skills. I had so much fun creating this series for you. So I encourage you to not only receive this gift, yes, there is a minimal fee, but that fee is a way to show your support. The podcasting wing of my nonprofit, and that is today's Heartlift with Janelle. We are reaching all over the world, by the way, and your support, your financial support, of course, your prayerful support as well, but your financial support enables me to do this work, to fund all of the different things that it takes to run this podcast. So please visit Heartlift Central and become a paid subscriber. It's discounted for you right now, and enjoy this Advent glimmering season with me. Okay, without further ado, I bring to you today an incredible show with Alastair Stern, the author of Longing for Joy. Oh my goodness, you're really in for a treat. My whole new tenet for this community is joy building, and Alastair's new book is a manual for doing so. So, Heartlifters, let's give Alastair a very warm, heart-lifting welcome. Heartlifters, here he is. I told you I was bringing to you Alastair Stern. Alastair, welcome to the show. I am so happy and grateful to have you come here and instruct us on how to find joy, how to joy hunt in our life is what I call it. Joy hunt and joy build. Welcome.
Yeah, Janelle, thank you for having me. And it was just such a joy to chat with you beforehand.
It's so
I'm
fun.
really excited for this conversation.
Well, I'm just so happy to have you here. I love that, I am privileged to get a media kit, which is fun. But then I usually do my own things because I just get so deep into the book. But I love that it says taking joy back from joy mania, from authors who just say step 1, step 2. I'm a prescriptive author, so I don't really like to call it self-help, but prescriptive nonfiction. There does tend to be a leaning towards steps. Your book is different. And it's making me just deeply grateful. One of my mottos the last few months, maybe 6 months actually, has been when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And then when the student's really ready, the teachers will disappear, which really has a lot of profound biblical meaning to me. And so I prayed that, and God has just been so faithful, and you are one of those answers to my prayers. Because I am craving teaching on prayer, on joy, craving it. So you say very early on, it's not about choosing joy. So tell the little story around that.
Yeah, I was in the office and I saw a coworker had a magnet that said "Choose Joy," and so when she went on her lunch break, I snuck in with a Sharpie and crossed it out and wrote "Cultivate Joy."
It's just brilliant.
Yeah, and I like to be generous. Like, I think when people say choose joy, they mean well, right? I don't think anybody who says choose joy is advocating something harmful, but I think it can sometimes become a pressure that builds, and it can become a bit of a mantra of toxic positivity that doesn't want to tend to other important emotions. And so choosing joy is also a bit reductionistic because I wish our emotional life was that simple. Like, if I could just determine how I feel, that would be great. And I don't want to deny that we have some influence over our emotions.
Oh, we do, for sure.
Yeah, we can definitely shape our emotional experience, but we are not fully in control. And so if you say choose joy and you mean, hey, I want to have a mindset that is intentionally trying to keep an eye out for joy and live a life that's more joyful, hey, I'm with you. And I think that's what people mean. But I think a better word is cultivate.
I love the word cultivate. It is just my gardening hands just get it.
Yeah, and I use this analogy of gardening in my book of you can't choose carrots out of your garden unless you plant the seeds and tend to the garden.
That's
So
right.
choosing carrots is an outcome of the cultivation.
It is.
In the same way, choosing joy would be an outcome of cultivating your life to be lived on the precipice of joy, always on the threshold of joy as an ever-present possibility. So
Mm-hmm.
I I choose cultivate also because I think joy speaks in the middle voice. Um, the
Oh,
theologian Charles Matthews talks about joy speaking in the middle voice. It's both active, joy is something that happens to us. Sorry, passive joy is something that happens to us, but also active. It takes some effort on our part. And
yeah.
it's not just one or the other. You know, sometimes we're totally surprised by joy, caught off guard,
Yes.
and it happens to us. And then sometimes we're actually doing something like gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
rejoicing, and joy comes alongside
Worshiping.
and says,
Mm-hmm.
great. So I think cultivation gets to the heart of that middle voice where there's an active and passive kind of participation in the life of joy. And our work isn't so much of laying a hold of joy directly, but
Mm-hmm.
cultivating our lives to be more ready to dance with joy when joy is nearby or when joy arrives. And so,
And you
um,
personify her so beautifully. I
yeah, and
love to personify emotions. Like all I could think about was Inside Out 2. Well,
sure,
Inside
sure.
Out 1, of course, Joy's the main character, but in Inside Out 2, she has quite the transformation.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching it in parallel with this conversation with Alastair because Joy just has quite a transformation. I don't know what else to say. Watch it with
Yeah, I think,
great
and I
care.
would summarize the transformation of similar to my own journey, honestly.
Yeah.
Of
Tell us,
I
because
went
I,
through a season of depression and joylessness that lasted for several years, and
mm-hmm,
um, coming out of that season,
mm-hmm.
there's many factors, but one was recognizing that I had been performing spiritual bypassing on myself. So
Ooh,
spiritual
we've talked
bypassing
a
is when,
lot. Yeah.
yeah, someone dies and you say, oh, they're in a better place. It's a platitude, and I'm sure the person who says that often means well, but they often say it because they don't want to share in the grief or they don't know what to say. But
They just don't know what to say.
I was spiritually bypassing myself because I wasn't feeling
Mm,
anything. I was just numb. And I would be like, well,
yeah.
the Bible says to rejoice always. So just work on rejoicing more.
Mm,
And I was just ignoring conveniently the passages that say, you know, weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn,
yeah.
lament, you know, all these other
Lament.
emotions that we need to
Yes.
process. And so, similar to Joy in Pixar's movie, where she was spiritually bypassing, you know, the protagonist's memories so that they're only joyful without any other
I
emotions.
know.
I had to kind of embody the wisdom of Brene Brown that says you can't selectively numb emotions. You numb one, you numb them all.
Yes.
And it was in learning to make room for grief and sorrow that joy surprised me. And so it
Oh.
wasn't that I got my whole life figured out or fixed everything. It was just that I started feeling the full spectrum of emotions again. So if you're lacking joy, sometimes you actually need to pay attention to your joylessness.
Oh, and you do. And you
Yeah.
write about it so well. Can I read just
Well,
a couple paragraphs?
sure. Yeah. Thank you.
You write depression. A few months after I started medication, now I'm starting midstream. So you're just going to have to get his book and read it. A few months after I started medication, I was alone and I wasn't doing anything but sitting on my couch. But I felt different. I've been here, Alistair, I've been here. I couldn't name the feeling at first. Then an epiphany. I was happy. As I sat so still as not to scare happiness away, Joy said, "Don't mind if I do," and cozied between us. She felt like the presence of a friend after a long absence. You pick up where you left off, and you write about medication playing a part. On my therapist side, I am so curious if depression walked alongside of you your whole life, or maybe sadness, or did it just suddenly appear? And if you would maybe help us have a peek behind the curtain to help someone
Sure. Sure.
understand, you don't have to. But, was it just one moment in life? All of a sudden you got really depressed and it didn't go away. The black cloud just hovered over. Or was it circumstantial? What brought on
Yeah.
that depression with a capital D?
Yeah, that's a great question. I went through some childhood trauma that
Hmm.
um, I think a lot of my life can kind of be like a textbook example of what happens when any child experiences any trauma is that
Yeah.
you're going to be inclined in a certain direction. And
Yes.
so I think for me, depression was largely a simmering experience for me of it was just kind of
Okay.
this like baseline. I've always been very existential, and I would err on the angsty side of existentialism toward nihilism.
Okay.
And
Tell us
that
a
that was
little bit
always
more
just
about that. A little bit more.
yeah. So just like I always had this struggle of like life just seems meaningless. Everything I do doesn't seem to have a purpose. Um, and that
Hmm.
was just a nagging thing that my parents, as well as they loved me, just that's not their experience of life, and so they
Mm-hmm.
didn't quite understand how deeply I think that impacted me of
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure those things out and
Or a
not
thinker,
having
I guess, right? A thinker, a
yeah
deep
thinker
thinker.
and so yeah through my 20s
Mhm.
you know I think what was deceptive for me was that I carried a pretty serious depression with me, but I was still high functioning.
Oh, hello.
And so,
Welcome to today's Heart Lift. We have so many high functioning men and women.
yeah.
I'm
And so I
laughing, but
think,
it's not funny because it's just,
yeah, it's hard because we think of depression and we think of it impacting like you can't get out of bed. And certainly that is a severe
yes.
form of depression. I don't want to
Mhm.
gloss that, but for me,
No.
that was never the problem.
Hmm.
The problem was that I wasn't feeling anything at a certain point. And so
Yeah, just
flash
numb.
forward into my 30s and I'm church planting
Ooh.
and we're starting a family simultaneously. So we've got a newborn
Ooh.
and then yeah, there was some conflict in the church that I was
Hmm.
walking through and then I had my first anxiety attack and I've never experienced
Oh.
something like that before and I haven't since. And
Oh, thank
that's how
God.
I ended up in the doctor's office and ran through the PHQ-9, which is kind of like a psychological assessment tool and
Good
I
doctor.
scored yeah, I scored very high in severe depression and she's Irish and she just kind of was like, when I take this test, I score a 2, maybe a 3 on a bad day. You scored 17.
Oh,
And so
that's a
what she
great
said to me is,
moment for you.
yeah, she's like, I don't know how you get through a day. Like, I can't imagine it. And so it was just very shocking, right? I
Sobering.
didn't see it that way. And it was in the
Hmm.
book, I describe it as like almost like receiving the gift of tongues. Like it was like a new language
Yes.
of like,
Yes. I
oh,
love how
I'm
you describe
depressed.
it. Yes. It
Yeah.
was a new language for you. I
Um,
love that.
yeah. And so I recognize like for me, medication was a path I went. And for some people, there's a lot of
Mhm.
fear around medication because
Oh,
it
yeah.
involves the mind. And we have this kind of like disembodied view of the mind, like the mind's not a part of the body.
Mhm.
But, I see antidepressants the same way I would see taking medication for a heart issue or diabetes or whatever. Like it's
That's
just
exactly
doesn't
right.
change it doesn't change who you are. And for my case, it actually gave me the reprieve I needed to start working on some stuff.
Yes. Thank you for
And
saying
and so
that.
I'm no longer on medicine for myself.
Oh,
Like after 3
wonderful.
years, my doctor was like, "Hey, like you seem like you're doing really well. I always like to
Hmm.
see how a client does,
This is a
if they
good
wean off."
doctor.
And when I weaned off, yeah, I was fine. And I know that's
Okay.
not the case for some people, but
Right.
so it's not a bad thing if you have to continue on medicine.
No, it is
In
not.
my
Mm-mm.
story, I was able to wean off, but it gave me the reprieve to recognize like, okay, I need to figure this out.
Hmm.
And I just preached on this on Sunday of just
Oh,
like, okay, when I paid attention to my joylessness, it was like this list, right? It was like, okay, so I've got unprocessed trauma that I've got to work through with a counselor.
yeah. A
Um,
trauma
I,
informed.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, the depression, I needed to develop some new habits like gratitude and running. Running was like my cure all, honestly.
Yeah. You had to get it out of your body.
Movement.
Your movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, my sense of like shame, because I kind of had grown in this toxic positive or a toxic shame of like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And I had to work through that. And even like a sense of like God's absence, I had to work through with a spiritual director. And so like, it's like this holistic thing that I was approaching,
Yes.
not all at once. I use the analogy of like, it's like learning to brush my daughter's hair. Like as a
Oh.
father, I just figured you hack at it. And that just causes pain, right? It's like, no, I have to work from the
Yes.
tips upward and
Especially
tend
if
to
it's
the knots
curly.
as you find them. And what I discovered was that joy likes brushing the knotted hair of joylessness.
Oh,
And so intending to
Alastair,
the
this is
knots,
so good. Tending to the
yeah,
knots.
joy met me there. So it wasn't that, oh, I had to get all that stuff fixed, even though I think I've grown quite a bit and healed quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit. It
Mm-hmm.
was actually just paying attention to my joylessness. Then joy was like, yeah, I'm here too. There's room for me
Right.
in this experience. But if you want to deny your joylessness, you're going to deny joy as well.
And if you numb it, correct, like you referenced so many things that we talk a lot about here on today's Heartlift. Brene Brown, for sure, she is the one who taught me if you can't hold sorrow, you can't experience joy. They
Right.
they go together. And you and I talked about Pastor Tim Keller before we hit record. And one of the things he said that I will never forget is we direct our emotions. Our emotions don't direct us, they don't drive us. And I never forgot that. And so that's emotional regulation, right? That, yes, we have
Yeah.
the power, the capacity, God breathed it into us. You experience not only depression, but this joylessness. You write it so
Right.
well. You're in your doctoral program and you've got thousands of books. I'm using a hyperbole. Stacks and
It
stacks
felt
of
like that.
books.
It
Yeah,
felt
I
like
bet
that.
it
Yeah.
did. I felt it too, because I have been in that place. And you're just like, this is a bunch of mess. Like, joy. Where's the joy? You can read millions of books on joy, but you can't read a book and get joy. So, where was the joylessness at that point? Like, what was the epiphany of like, okay, I need to write a book?
Hmm.
You
Yeah. I
have
think,
one book on identity primarily that we'll come back to at another time. But this one, where was it? Was it in this discovery period of working on your doctorate?
yeah, I think it was early on, but even before the doctorate of, um, I started getting really interested in joy as once I was diagnosed with depression. And
Mm-hmm.
to just touch on that again for a moment, like for me, I think it was a combination of physiological and circumstantial issues. And
Yeah.
once I addressed some of the circumstantial things, I've found my physiological experience of depression to be something quite manageable.
Mm.
Um, so that's my experience. So I would say like I have depressive moments and I still
Tendencies.
tendencies, but I wouldn't describe myself as someone who is depressed anymore. But I recognize again, like that's because it's not entirely physiological for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so as I started to kind of walk in that path of recovery, I got really interested in joy. Like why don't I have joy? And then I would experience it like, how do I hold on to it? Why is it so alluring
Fleeting.
and yet so elusive? And so early on, as I started to grow in my own joy, I was like, I want to write about this. So I was preaching through Philippians during my depressive season, and I recognized, oh man, I only touched on joy once. So this is Paul's most joyful letter, and I only
Yes.
preached on joy once in 14 sermons because I just didn't know what to do with it.
Oh,
And
I
so I
love
started
this.
intentionally studying joy in the scriptures, preaching about it, reading books about it, growing in it. And that out of that, I was like, I want to write about this. And I actually wanted to write about joy before my first book, but my first book was this kind of happy accident where it was discipleship material that we
Oh.
had produced for our church that kind of caught wind and became a book. Um,
Wow.
so joy had been kind of stirring in my heart for a long time. And then
Mm-hmm.
I did a doctorate full well knowing like my dissertation won't be the book. My dissertation is going to be read by, 5 people. And after the doctorates, when did I defend? 2021, I think.
Oh, wow. That's very
So
recent.
yeah, so joy was kind of like, all right, when am I going to write the book? And it was just needed a bit more time to percolate. So
Yes.
yeah, it was a desire to on the one hand, I wanted to set up like an Ebenezer, like a makeshift model collection of stones, and just honor my story and what God's done in it, and
Yeah.
and kind
Yeah.
of codify some of the lessons.
Yes, I love
But the
that.
deep, but there was also a deeper desire of like I want to help people encounter the joy of salvation. So
Hmm.
whether that's like King David, if someone's praying, "Restore to me the joy of my salvation," or they've never
Hmm.
encountered the joy of salvation, I really tried to write a book that I could feel confident to give to someone who's not yet a Christian and say, "Hey, I think not only will this teach you a lot about joy, but it'll also introduce you to the gospel."
Here is the question that I had. The book is in three parts, just to go. It's longing for joy, which bravo with that verb, because isn't that what we all long for?
Mhm.
Is this deep sense of joy and contentment, right? The story of joy and then the possibility of joy. You
Mhm.
write that joy is not a forced smile. I have to make sure this gets on this
Mhm.
in this conversation. Joy is not a forced smile or suppression of negative emotions.
Mhm.
It is not feigning a happy life or pretending all is well. Because I said to you prior to the recording that I believe my generation of women raised in the evangelical community, it was Jesus, joy, Jesus, others, you. There
Mhm.
was no you. I mean, just you were last place.
Right.
All well-meaning, as we're saying here. These are all they can. I mean, my whole premise of my second book was, is it mean or well-meaning? So I've really studied
Mhm.
deeply if something's well-meaning or is it just plain mean. And I think most of the time it's well-meaning. You write, and this was, look, I have it all like highlighted, and joy requires fostering emotional health.
Mhm.
That just might be on my website as my next phase of what I'm going to do in life.
Yeah.
What? Where did that sentence come from? Why did you put that
Yeah.
sentence in there?
Yeah. I think it was precisely that, like to counterbalance the excessive emphasis on positive emotions in some
Mm.
Christian circles. Um, Now, I'm going to be in agreement that our baseline through eternity is going to be somewhere between experiencing joy dancing between love and peace, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
that's the eternal trajectory, and we certainly experience that now. That's why I call joy an emotion or eternity seeking emotion, because whereas
Yes.
we want grief and sadness and sorrow to end, we want love, joy, compassion, and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in the meantime, then, when we live in the already not yet of the kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
when we live in a world where there's still tragedy and suffering,
So
um,
much.
we can't fragment our emotional life. And if we're
Mm-hmm.
going to follow the Lord, who's actually called the man of sorrows, not the man of joy, although I think we could call him
Mm-hmm.
the man of joy.
Yeah, I
And I
think
make I
he's
make my
not.
case for that in the book.
Yeah, it's
But
not
he's the
either
man of
or, is it?
sorrows.
Yeah, I did a
Um,
whole dance choreography around that, A Man of
yeah.
Sorrows.
Yeah, and you even look at the Psalms and the range of
Mm-hmm.
emotions expressed, that the Bible is really calling us to emotional health. Um,
Yes. Oh my
and
gosh.
health doesn't mean to me like, oh, you feel every emotion the right way. It
No.
just means that there's room for every emotion, and
Mm.
um,
Mm.
that even if the emotion is painful or more difficult to feel or a little uglier, you don't
Mm-hmm.
just ignore that because it's harder. And even
It's
if the
so
emotions
good.
are positive, you don't hold on to them so tightly that you choke the life out of them.
No,
That
my
you
gosh.
you allow the emotions to be what they are and to communicate what they need to communicate, and then you use them ideally as tethers to the heart of Christ, right? Of how does this emotion draw me closer to Christ? What's the invitation here?
You're just killing me. Oh, this wisdom that's coming forth from you, Alistair. It's no wonder you had such existential crises in your life. You do understand that, right? You do
Thank you.
understand that there is the depth
my
to
mom wrote
you.
me a lovely note. She listened to one of my podcast I was interviewed on, and she's like, "You sounded very smart, but I want to remind you, I know who you are." So I appreciate it, but my mom keeps me humble, and it's the most loving way possible.
I love to talk to your mom. It's fantastic. Well, I'm going to have to rewind that when I'm editing this, because I feel like you just defined emotional health in such a tangible, beautiful way.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could use an analogy, right, of
Please.
my wife's a therapist and
Okay.
has been, specializing in intuitive eating, and so then I
Oh,
passively learn from her as she's internalizing it. And I
oh,
think we can have this misguided notion that health equals a skinny body, for example,
oh my.
and where larger body is unhealthy. And there's this bias in medicine, even, right, that a patient will be prescribed lose weight before you can get the surgery, but none of the actual data supports that.
None of the testing coming back. The
So you can
cardiac,
have a very
right?
different shaped body, whether it's small or large, and
Right.
be healthy. So health is not, oh, conform your body to look a certain way. Health is living in the body you have in a healthy way. And so
Correct.
in the same way with our emotions, it's not that we conform our emotions to look a certain way, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's culture saying, if you grow up in a kind of stoic household and saying,
Mm-hmm.
we don't express emotions, or conforming our emotions to always be positive. And
Mm-hmm.
if that's kind of the environment, but saying, no, like there's a breadth of our emotions that we're meant to experience. And some of us experience them more intensely than others. Some of us have a wider range than others, but emotions are a God-given gift to our humanity. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually, we take away our dignity when we take away the breadth of emotions. Like, God didn't give us grief so that we're just in pain all the time. He gave us grief
No.
because in a world of suffering, like if you couldn't grieve, what a sick
Oh,
world that would be.
and how sick our bodies would be,
Right.
and how sick many of our bodies are,
Yeah.
because we know the body keeps the score. And so, much like yourself, which is a great amount of the work that I've done is in trauma informed therapy. And so if you repress those trauma memories, anything that's just too big for your body to hold, I mean, you're going to get depressed. You're going to get diseased, right? So I love to say that emotional health is just living in a mindfulness of dis-ease,
Right.
because I think the word ease is highly undervalued.
Yeah.
Because even Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light.
Right.
You also say I could camp on that for hours, but we will not. A more joyful life is not quickly developed.
Mhm.
So there are just so many misconstrued ideas about joy, which is why I am overjoyed that you are here to help us really understand the story of joy. That's the whole section in the book, because it is slow, I think. There's another article that I have put out. I didn't write it, called Joy Building, and it
Mhm.
changed my life. And I think that's what you're saying here. So you define it as an emotion. We know it's an emotion that arrives as our lives are apprehended by goodness or beauty. Why isn't it a quick process? Why isn't it, I just wake up, I set an intention, I choose joy today?
Yeah, I think part of the reason it's not quick is it's part of our sanctification. So in the same way, like, I think it was Dallas Willard who said, like, there's no miracle of character healing in the Bible, like where it's like the person is just a perfect person in that moment. And, we heal bodies, and you see moments of repentance. I mean, maybe the closest is Zacchaeus, right? Like that seems like
Yes.
his character was healed, but he's got to walk that out. He's got to live that out.
Gotta
And
walk it
so,
out. We don't get all the walking out,
yeah, in the who can understand the mind of God? But his heart for us is to go through the refining fires of love in such a way that the pain of being conformed to the image of Christ is tolerable enough on this earthly life. So I think that's partly why it's slow. I think maybe like a theology of positive emotions to me is like, I think we also can't handle the breadth of God's emotion toward us. So I think of like Ephesians 3, where Paul prays for the church that we might first be strengthened by the Spirit so that Christ can dwell in us.
Right.
That the Spirit would fill all God's people so that we can have the strength to be loved by the love that's beyond height and depth and breadth. So to even be loved by God requires God intervening in our inner life, giving us strength to handle the breadth of his love. But wouldn't that be true of his joy as well? And so if we want to grow in joy, then there's an interior strengthening that has to happen, a fortitude, a perseverance. I also, like I mentioned, if you're in the throes of joylessness, like those are not usually quick fixes.
No.
So if someone's thinking, oh, I'm going to read your book and be joyful from here on, probably not. I'm hoping that it sets you in the right direction. If you're like, hey, I'll give you 3 years, great. You'll be more joyful in 3 years.
Yes.
But you're not going to be more joyful in 4 weeks. But I did write the book in the hope that you'll feel joy throughout, because I'm not going to name any books, but I've read far too many books about joy that were very dour and didn't even make me crack a smile. So I've tried to write with some levity and some fun. And
you have. I've smiled a million times already. So.
Yeah, and yet, if you want to consistently be more joyful, it's going to take continually walking in the direction of Jesus and letting him sanctify you as he sees fit, bringing more joy into your life as he sees fit.
As he sees fit. Alastair. Oh, you're just really challenging me here to just get off of the path, because you're going so deep, especially with having to be strengthened in our spirit in order to receive it. Can you give me a little more on that? Because I get it. Really get it. But I'm not sure. Like, I didn't get it a year ago, right? It has taken some deep sorrows and trials. So if we can kind of help give someone a little guide that.
I think James Resegwe, I'm probably butchering his last name. I'm sorry, James, but New Testament scholar. And he had a little turn of phrase I read 18 years ago, I think, and I still remember it. And it's just it's a terrible term, but it works. Spiritual constipation.
Oh,
so if we're spiritually constipated, the solution to that is not eating more food,
more fiber.
Or that's gonna make you very uncomfortable. And so, in the same way, like if you want more emotion, like you're not actually, like if you're a really restricted person, or if you're not comfortable with emotions, like I'm still pretty uncomfortable with certain emotions.
I mean, look at your face.
Yeah.
You imaged that very well. You're like, if you're uncomfortable, like.
Yeah. And so it's going to be hard to feel the breadth of God's joy because you're not comfortable with feeling. And so I think part of why it's a slow process is we're being shaped and formed into the image of Christ. We're being prepared to share in the life of the Trinity, and we are already participating in that divine nature. And so divine, or should I say essence? I'll let the theologians sort that out.
I know. Yeah.
But that's a process. And so.
Yeah, because where do we cultivate joy? If we go down to, the one scripture that to me was given for us to understand where we're really going to get that joy.
Yeah. And I think for me, my kind of core passage is John 15, when Jesus is teaching about remaining and abiding in him, making our home in him. being connected to him like a branch to the vine,
Mm.
doing that through faith, but also faith working itself out in love. I've told you
Yeah.
these things so that you might love one another as I've loved you. Well, how has he loved us? Well, abide in me as I in you, because as the Father's loved me, I've loved you, abide in my love. So there's this
Abide,
mystery
abide,
of like
abide.
faith and
Hmm.
love is
Yeah.
how we abide. John 15:11, I've told you these things so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full or
Oh,
complete. And so
mature.
this idea is like there's a joy that we experience that's common or natural, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
And these are good joys. They're not flippant. It's not bad to have joy
No.
in the birth of a
Mm-mm.
grandchild or
Hmm.
joy over a sunset or joy over sourdough toast with butter, like whatever it may be.
Oh, yum.
Um,
That sounds
but
so
the
good.
Jesus is saying, but my joy will be in you.
Yeah.
And so this is the joy of the Spirit.
Hmm.
It's the Spirit dwelling in us, sharing the heart of God with us.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that is deeply mysterious, something that is
So mysterious. Thank you.
experiential, um,
Yes.
something that tops off and fills up our joy, and yet
Yeah.
leaves us longing for more joy. And I think for
Yeah, because
me,
once you've tasted.
part of why I think the process is slow is because I think the longing doesn't go away. I think
Mm-mm.
what I've come to see is our longing for joy is a kind of blessedness. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." The
Mhm.
blessedness is not in the satisfaction, it's in the hunger. And so God has
Yes.
placed eternity in our hearts, and He's
Yes.
made us long for Him, and that we often feel the longing for joy more than we feel joy.
Hmm.
And that working out of that process, the gap between it is slow because the Lord's preparing us for a glory that we can't even comprehend.
Yeah. And I mean, wouldn't it be that in his presence is fullness of joy? Is it
Amen.
fair to say that's the mystery to me? Because
Yeah.
for me, and I know that I am not rare, the work of being in the presence of God, setting aside busyness or ambition or strife or ministry or fill in the blank,
Mhm.
just eats away at the source of where real joy is going to come from.
Yeah. Yeah. In your presence is the fullness of joy. I think that's another great
Mm.
passage to go to because it's just reminding us that the face of God smiles with joy.
Oh, my goodness gracious. It just really
And
does.
and I think, going to attachment theorists who
Hmm.
look at joy as an early emotion of attachment, where,
Hmm.
as an infant, you have the face of a parent beaming upon you with joy, and that's how
I
you
know.
develop a healthy attachment. That it's very telling then that God says,
It's a beam gleam.
speak these words, priests, right? The Lord
Yeah.
bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you.
Thank you for
And so that
saying
face
that.
is, yeah, the face is shining with joy upon us, and it's to attach us to him in a healthy way,
Hmm.
so that we can share in his joy. And
Because it's the mirror neurons, right? We can go into
yeah,
neuroscience. We know that. We're learned here in this community, I think. We've been studying that and attachment and all those jazzy terms, but it's the
yeah,
mirror neurons. When I hold my baby June or my baby Isaac or whoever, it's like that's why I have to I want to be there as close to their birth as possible.
right,
So I can just gaze. It's a beam gleam. That's what they call it. It's what we're
mm,
all looking for. And if
yeah,
I don't avail myself to the invisible face of God that I can't literally see, but I can sit in quiet, eventually I'm going to feel his presence.
mhm.
But I can't just be busy, 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 busy. I can't. It's
Yeah.
not.
As N.T. Wright puts it, like we slow down to catch up with God,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And
beautiful.
I think that's really important when it comes to our emotional life with God. That
Hmm.
for me, at least, I can be slow to know what I'm feeling, and so
Mm.
it takes time for me to be still and
Mm.
um, bring those feelings before the Lord and him help me
Yeah,
understand what they even are.
yeah. It
And
has
so
to be
it's a slow
really
work.
difficult.
It's
It's a
just,
slow work.
and I think that's just what it is to be walking with Jesus and
Yeah.
being formed and
We're
changed
just
into
joy
this like
gardeners. I like that
degree
term.
degree by degree, right?
Yeah. And so the two things I did not want to leave uh, this conversation without is you talk about, oh, let me just read it. The central thesis of my book, you write, posits, such an academic, that the presence of God embodies boundless joy and that his companionship assures us of the inherent possibility of experiencing profound joy in our lives. Throughout the book, you, Alastair, try to humanize joy and spiritualize joy. So, what does that mean? To
Yeah.
humanize joy and spiritual. I thought that was really something I want to know.
Yeah, I think the greater work was to humanize it. So I think sometimes we can speak about like the joy of spirit in contrast to natural joys.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that tendency. Obviously the joy of God is not the same as the joy of sourdough. That's just silly.
I don't know. I think
Uh,
he might say, I don't know how God thinks about all that.
yeah, I'm not saying he doesn't delight in
He
sourdough,
might delight in it,
but
yeah.
by humanizing joy, what I want to say is like we can't really speak about joy unless we're talking about a human emotion.
Right.
So
Okay.
we need to understand this as an emotion, not as a state, not as a
Love, peace, joy, a fruit of the
conviction.
spirit.
Yeah, and the Spirit of God speaks in the human emotion of joy. And
Mhm.
yet this emotion has a divine origin. When we experience the joy of the Lord, when we experience the joy of the Spirit, when we step into the joy that Christ promises, I actually disagree. I don't think it diminishes our earthly joys, but illuminates them
Mm.
and gives us more opportunities to rejoice in the Lord. And so when you have the joy of the Lord, you see every little joy as a gift coming from his hand.
Mhm.
And so that's spiritualizing them. So I'm humanizing it so that we can spiritualize it.
And how do you do that? So give me a day. Give
Yeah.
me a day. Like how have you, because I can probably guarantee that you embody joy.
Mhm.
You embodied
Yeah,
it now.
I have my bad days, but I have my good days. And for me, gratitude is the practice that builds on ramps to joy. That's Willie Jennings'
Mm.
little phrase there. And
I like
I
it.
find that to be true, where I try to express my thankfulness to people. I try to overthank
Mm.
people.
Oh,
Um, I try to course correct back to gratitude.
what does
I
that look
try to,
like? Just give me a real humanizing, how do you
yeah,
course
like,
correct to that? Oh, whoops.
like my daughters this morning, I woke up to them bickering over who had to put the dishes away. And I've been trying to
Oh,
teach them about teamwork
oh
and,
boy.
in the politest way possible, which was not very polite. I said, to my eldest daughter to come see me. Right. And
Ooh,
I was like,
come sit on the couch. No, that's what we
yeah,
would have
like,
said.
and they got, a consequence for their behavior. So
Wow.
I started the day off kind of grumpy.
Yeah. Well,
That'd be
how old are
a
they?
nice assessment. 11 and 9.
Bless you.
Yeah. And so, and I'm driving them to school and I can
Oh,
tell like my eldest daughter's heart's a
mm.
little wounded.
Oh,
And,
my dad.
um, I just reached back and held her hand for a bit, like little moments.
Oh,
And
heavens.
when necessary, I apologized to them. Like, hey, I was
Hmm.
maybe too harsh there. I didn't feel that in this instance, but so it's with my
Wow.
wife, if we have a tough moment, like being
Yeah.
quick to say sorry, being quick to take ownership, being quick to recognize that if we don't live in congruence, that's going to
Mm.
rob us of joy. And so
Hmm.
living a life of ongoing repentance to me is, why don't I work from the baseline assumption that I probably am the one who's wrong? Now I know that could go too far. And so for joy, that helps me readily be like, okay, like I'm grumpy right now, but clouds are really cool, don't you think?
Oh, I
And
love
that's
me
the
some
sort of stuff I
clouds.
do
Yeah, I
in
do it
my
all the
head.
time too. Yes.
I'm stuck in traffic. I'm like, how wild is it that I know how to drive a car? What a cool invention. So I try to take a childlike awe to the ordinary and say, like, all these things that just become automated and just
Mhm.
part of life. I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's pretty cool that like right now you and I are in different parts of the world and these
It's
wires and cables and
crazy.
computers, and
I
here we
know.
are talking, and that we have a language that we can even understand one
I
another.
know.
And
It's beautiful. It's so cool.
And so
There's no Morse code. I know.
Many years of discipline of gratitude, I'm more readily disposed to be grateful.
I like that you bring the word discipline in. I do. I think that's a real critical aspect.
And that is like, for me, the aha moment is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Paul says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God for your life. And that God's will is for us to rejoice, pray, and give thanks. And I know those qualifiers can be intense. I think what Paul's saying is like, hey, when you stop, start again. If you give up, try again. Keep at it. Just keep at it is basically the goal.
Don't stop.
Yeah. But it's God's will. So what we can fuss, what's God's will for my life? What should I do with my life? But God's will is like, hey, rejoice, pray, give thanks. And I've found giving thanks keeps me close to the heart of God. And
that's good. That's really good.
And so even on my bad days, I'm always just trying to say thank you.
And we will have bad days. We will. I want everyone here to know we will have bad days. We will. I'm melancholic. I may not be clinically depressed, but I definitely suffer with depression as well. But I think what you're trying to help us understand and grasp is to make this a practice, a spiritual practice in our lives. And you say cultivate a receptivity to joy, which is what I love. I love cultivate, be aware. Like you said, I mean, last week, my husband had a surgery and it got complicated the next day, and we had to go back to the hospital, and I was just not pleased. I was not happy. It was not what I had planned for the day. And after being a caregiver of my mother for almost a decade, I'm wheeling him down, and I'm triggering, of course, like, oh no, let this not be the next 10 years of my life, and I can't punish him. It's not his fault. But I knew what I had to do. I had to course correct, like you said earlier. And I'm like, I got to get to the chapel. I got to find me that hospital chapel because I know me. And so I went and found it. It was very small, but it had like a Michelangelo sky at the top of it. And so I just sat down and I got quiet. It wasn't long. And I just said, what am I missing? Because I'm missing something. My attitude stinks. Help me out. Is that what you're saying? Am I allowing a cultivation?
That's basically it. Because even in that moment, you might not feel better. But you're saying, hey, I'm going to put my hands in the dirt.
Yeah.
Right. So right now, all I see is the mud, but I'm going to get in the mud and put some seeds in there. And sometimes those seeds bloom quickly and sometimes they bloom down the road. But it's just recognizing that there is, and this is going back to the choose joy, like we're choosing a perspective in which
it's a mindset. I do think we have to get our mind right. I mean, Paul tells us that. He's very clear on that. So it involves all the things we've already said: discipline, cultivation, choosing and making choices is part of, thought work and all of these things. I do love how you have used really early on how this reductionist attitude that we've had about this word, this emotion, this fruit of the Spirit, joy. And I can't begin to thank you enough for staying power in your life, for you getting off that couch, and for seeking help for your mind, your soul, your body. And that's not easy. It's really not easy for a man. And so I hope that God expands your territory in many, many beautiful, healthy ways so that you can continue to guide us all onto the path of joy.
Thank you so much, Janelle. And this has just been such an enjoyable conversation. So thank you for hosting it and for such great questions and encouragement.
It's just been the best. Thank you. Heartlifter, what spoke to your heart? Alastair gave us so many beautiful thoughts about joy. This went long, so I don't want to take any more of your time, but I do invite you to hop over to @Heartlift Central over on Substack. Just put @Heartlift Central in your Google search and my Substack will come up. And be sure to become a paid monthly subscriber or a paid annual subscriber. And if you're feeling extremely generous, you can become a founding member, and that would just be awesome. It's taken me a while to complete the transition and go totally over to my Substack to give it full focus, but we're going to be doing an Advent glimmering that's just the beginning of our time together there. Heartlifter, I hope that you're already feeling more joy. Over on Substack, just put @Heartlift Central in your Google search and my Substack will come up. And be sure to become a paid monthly subscriber or a paid annual subscriber. And if you're feeling extremely generous, you can become a founding member, and that would just be awesome. It's taken me a while to complete the transition and go totally over to my Substack to give it full focus, but we're going to be doing an Advent glimmering that's just the beginning of our time together there. Heartlifter, I hope that you're already feeling more joy. I will see you over on Heartlift Central for some Advent glimmering.